So Ruai Family Health Hospital is a private hospital, and it's a member of the Kenya Association of Private Hospitals. So this association released a statement yesterday as well, and they were talking about all these issues that we are raising. They say, in our view, there is no nexus between the possible risk that the public was exposed to in an outreach exercise courtesy of an individual healthcare provider's unilateral actions and the safety of patients being managed within the facility. They're also raising that issue. They are saying, indeed, the abrupt decision to close the facility due to perceived risk to public safety is counterproductive in as far as it puts the lives of patients currently being managed at the facility in jeopardy at a time when the country's healthcare capacity and resources are stretched. The statement was signed by Dr. Timothy Olweny, who's the Secretary General of the Kenya Association of Private Hospitals, and he joins us now via video link. Good morning, Dr. Olweny.
Yes, morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to have you on the show, and thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Yes, you're welcome.
Now, a lot of things, that, just like we've said, a lot of things have happened. The council conducts investigations. Council finds out that there's something that has gone wrong in a health facility. Council is a regulator. Council decides to take this action. You took issue with the drastic action of closing the hospital, but you did not take issue with everything else, did you?
No, I didn't. It was very clear that there was a breach that had occurred in terms of public safety with regard to the vaccination. However, what we didn't feel was that there was a direct link between that and the safety of the entire population of patients within that hospital at that time and all the other people who had chosen to procure the services of Ruai Family Hospital.
Dr. Thank you very much for coming to the show this morning. This isn't the first time we've heard of a health facility being shut down in the country. It's just that usually it's some clinic or some small outfit that no one has ever heard of. And usually those who have the authority to license them and also shut them down give reasons as to why they're doing it. Would you say that this perhaps was more of a warning shot saying we will not take issues such as this one lightly, and that the likelihood of the entire facility being shut down because of even a minor infraction is something that can be a possibility? Do you think this was what we saw happening?
I think if it was a warning shot, then I think it went a little too far because it became counterproductive in as far as I want you to get the perspective that you've got some patients who are in this hospital who, for example, are on life support. We must also be very clear that the decision to be able to procure services from a particular facility is a very intricate and personal decision. It has got issues to do with possible close proximity. It's that you've got a healthcare provider you trust. It's a place that you can afford. It's the only place that has got the kind of service that you're seeking at that particular point. So, for example, to say that the entire population has to be moved out of that hospital within 24 hours is too radical. As far as I'm concerned, this can only be justified where there's egregious violation and widespread violation of public safety. But in this particular instance, you had an outreach exercise specific to vaccination outside the facility. Then you also have information, whether they had it or not, I'm not too sure, but you have information that this was a personal act by a particular employee. So I didn't see that the nexus between that. What I feel is that, first of all, maybe the vaccination exercise, what they should have terminated and then said, come and let us talk, let's hear your perspective. And the board is within its mandate to be able to regulate the operation of private health institutions and healthcare providers in general. But I think the manner in which it was done was rushed and it was counterproductive.
Right. So, what could there have been any lead, any kind of link then to maybe other things then? Because even speaking with the CEO yesterday, could there be another link that maybe something else was going on, which they wanted to use this as an opportunity to find out? Or to do the investigations or anything else? Because as you say, if it was just that vaccination drive was being carried out outside of the hospital, could there be that there was something else that was being looked for, which this would then shed light on?
I'd say a cursory look at the circumstances would say that there's more that meets the eye, but in my position, I would not be one to speculate as to what was going on.
Sure.
You know, the healthcare provision in this country, I think And those who provide it must be commended for the sterling work they've been doing, especially with this pandemic that we have. But most of the private sector and how it is that they've showed up the support that the government clearly has not been able to provide. However, as a union, I'm calling it a union of private hospitals, what structure do you have in place to ensure good health practices are maintained in all the facilities that are your members?
I think, first of all, it's that for you to be a member, I don't want people to assume that any private, as in non-government or non-faith-based institution, is a member of our organization. Ours is a very clearly selected group of people who, first of all, have been vetted and met the minimum regulatory thresholds to be able to operate as a private institution. And that's why I tell you that it is unusual for you to get egregious violations of policy or health guidelines within our institutions, because the same people that are supposed to regulate us are the ones who license us. So only licensed institutions where you've got institutions where you've got employees who are properly licensed, facilities that are properly licensed are our members. So it is very unusual for you to get gross violations within our institution. That is number one.
Yes.
That notwithstanding,
Yes.
there are certain things that will go wrong from time to time, because institutions are made up of groups of individuals, and the groups of individuals are selected from the general population. So even if you use the normal distribution, you'll find some people who will do some unusual things.
Yes, indeed. What you say is very true. But indulge us a little bit. Tell us, what are these things that you look for in your members? Okay, you've mentioned all the personnel are registered, they meet certain basic standards. What else in terms of facilities, in terms of the quality assurances? Please run us through the things that you look at before somebody becomes a member of your association.
First of all, you have to duly registered health workers. Okay. And the health workers are registered by different bodies that are professional bodies that regulate them, and statutory bodies. Mm-hmm. For the doctors and dentists, it's going to be the Medical Practitioners and Dentist Council. For nurses, it's going to be the Nursing Council. For clinical officers, it's going to be the Clinical Officers Council. And for the lab people, it's the Kenya Medical Laboratory Technicians and Technologists Board. For the radiologists, it's going to be the Radiology Protection Board. For pharmacists, Pharmacy and Poisons Board. So first of all, you've got people who are properly trained and duly licensed by those institutions. Then you have got the issues to do with the premises, which of course are usually licensed, and prior to licensing, you've got inspection that is also carried out by the same medical board. So once those minimum criteria are met, then again it is optional, because again people elect to join our membership of organization by virtue of being or wanting to benefit from certain services that we provide or technical expertise and so on.
Do you rely on the government services to ensure compliance with these regulations, or do you, as an organization, have your own unit that ensures that your members meet the standards that you've set?
We don't have the capacity at the moment to be able to have our own regulatory unit. What we do is we advise, we liaise with the relevant bodies so that we set various standards in terms of quality. So those are services that we provide as add-ons. But if you're asking directly whether we have a unit that goes around vetting the institutions and ensuring compliance, that we don't. But we generally meet together and provide advice and provide technical expertise to that effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, looking at this particular center, this particular facility then had this issue. But what we have seen now is that they are then forthwith prohibited from being a vaccination center moving forward, because of these happenings. It's obviously the area in which it is that a lot of people depend on it. So now, do you think that looking at the situation that we are currently in with vaccinations being necessary around the country, should it be opened up to more private facilities in the country to then provide this service to Kenyans?
In my opinion, there's not been significant engagement of the private sector in terms of vaccination exercise, and I think I've voiced this concern before. We must remember that the private health sector provides upwards of 40% of the healthcare needs of the population within this country at the moment. So you cannot have an effective vaccination exercise without actively involving the private sector. That having been said, vaccination, especially COVID vaccination, is a very serious matter. So the action that was taken by the board is justified. And in fact, that is the action I would have taken if I was sitting at the board at that time. So the action is justified because you can't have vaccination being carried out and you're not clear that it's going to be effective. That is justified. So until they go and do an audit and confirm that, again, all the safeguards are in place for safe vaccination to continue, I would put that on hold.
Okay.
I understand when you issued a statement and you're raising concern about that drastic action that was taken by the council to say shut down the entire facility and let all patients be transferred from the facility. That I can understand. However, at the same time, like you said, it's raising issues of a likelihood of endangering public safety. Now, if one issue is clearly coming out of this particular facility, is it not likely that there could be many other issues that need to be looked at? If an issue of vaccines have been given to you, everybody understands what this exercise is all about. Everybody understands you've been given vaccines, but through your own systems, vaccines have left your facility and they've found themselves outside even of the county that you're in, and they've gone to another place. Does that not raise concerns about then what are the safety measures that have been taken, the safeguards that have been taken by this particular facility to ensure that even the medicine that is supposed to be used by patients or the medicine that's supposed to be injected or administered to patients is actually the actual medicine, and that the staff are not substituting this and giving our patients something else?
It is possible, but not likely. And the reason I say this is that, you also have to look at the track record of the history of the organization. You must remember that a lot of these organizations see hundreds of people and provide care to them every single day. In the absence of you getting any regular complaints or even occasional complaints from a facility, it is unlikely. So I'll treat this as an isolated event. That would be my perspective. And I also want to emphasize the aspect here that we have to go to our procedural fairness. And let me give you, to illustrate my point, let me just ask you a question. You have seen gross violations of medical policy or various things happening in public institutions. If, for example, it happened in the county hospital, would it have been shut down overnight?
Very unlikely.
Extremely unlikely. And that is what we have said even in the past when other hospitals have been shut down because of certain breaches that have occurred. Let us not make private institutions a soft target in terms of being able to make a point. I think we also just want fairness, and I've said as an organization, we are not going to compromise public safety. That's one of the key things that we're here to take care of as healthcare providers and healthcare workers. But again, there has to be fairness. We must remember private institutions are also employers. So it's a wider perspective. We also employ people who depend on this institution. When you shut it down overnight, you're also jeopardizing the livelihoods of those who depend on that hospital. There are a lot of patients who come there for care and elect to do so for particular reasons. You're denying them that right. So I know you might not think institutions themselves have got rights, but within institutions, you've got individuals who also have rights that should not be violated, especially when it is not justified.
But beyond that, there's ongoing concerns and complaints by members of the public with regards to hospitals in general, but particularly in private hospitals. Somebody is seeking hospitalization for their loved one because they urgently require a bed or an ICU facility because of COVID. Let's not even talk about all the other cases. COVID. They get to a hospital at midnight or 2 a.m. and this facility says, all right, we cannot admit this patient unless you place a deposit. And the deposit is in hundreds of thousands. We had a callers yesterday. One caller went to a hospital in Mombasa and they were asked for, was it 800,000?
800. He even named the hospital specifically.
And about 2 a.m. Another one went to another hospital and they were told, all right, so the best I can do is I can put your patient on oxygen, supplemental oxygen, but I cannot admit them until you place 300,000 shillings deposit. And this is at 7 p.m. We see this very many times across the country, people complaining about this issue of hundreds of thousands of shillings of deposit before admission. Why is this so?
I think the situation we find ourselves in is pretty unusual. And I'll say unusual in this sense. Ordinarily, healthcare is supposed to be paid for under, in fact, one of the things about the push towards UHC is they want healthcare to be paid for, not at the point of service, but there has to be at the point of admission. Healthcare providers and institutions would prefer that we're discussing about the medical care of the patient as opposed to talking about money. However, the reality is, and we must remember, the responsibility for provision of health services rests upon the government and secondly upon the individuals, unfortunately. That's the true situation. Now, the government is supposed to, for all services, by the way, that are regarded as essential, the approach by government is that if you don't want a point where your population is put in jeopardy because of financial reasons, and especially because of private sector players, you provide the service. That is what the government has failed to do, and that's why even private healthcare players exist. So the challenge that we have is that responsibility is from the government. So in the setting of COVID, for example, it would have been one of those things that I would really like, that when we're raising funds for COVID response, we should be raising funds for provision of healthcare to the population. In our circumstances, we've provided funds for cushioning the economy, for doing all manner of other things, but fails to address the basic problem, which is a healthcare issue. So the challenge that we have is that healthcare institutions are in a situation also where insurance companies, because of the force majeure clause within our contracts, are not paying for COVID. NHIF is not paying for COVID. The government is not providing services for COVID. Let us be honest. If you had a healthcare institution that is going to provide services that cannot be paid for, the healthcare institution is going to shut down overnight. And you must remember, these are also private institutions which have got personal funds for investors, which also need to be secured. And that's why you have got this unfortunate situation we're in at right now. So I think there's a wider problem as opposed to just saying that private hospitals are all about money. Money is not everything, but money is also extremely important, we have to admit. And that's the challenge we find ourselves in. Because you cannot have a private investor coming and investing their money and then closing shop 2-3 days later. It means all the other patients who potentially could have benefited from this institution also denied that service. So there's a wider issue there which needs to be addressed. And I know it is unfortunate, and my heart bleeds whenever I hear people are being sent away from hospitals because of financial reasons. But I think the responsibility rests on the government and the population. They should be lobbying with the government to say, let us pay for healthcare. Even NHIF is not paying for healthcare. That is the social health insurer. If we cannot take care of population in this time, then I don't know what we're doing.
Dr. I don't think the complaint is so much about paying, it's the amounts.
And the timing.
And the timing, because if someone told you that they want you to explain and said what you need is A, B, C, D, and so that we can carry it out, what we require is, say, 50,000 shillings or 100,000 shillings. What I'm in essence asking, Dr. What is this thing that takes you to hospital at midnight that requires 800,000 shillings? What is it that takes you to hospital at the time you go to hospital outside normal business hours that requires 200,000 shillings? And not all these people are supposed to be taken to an ICU. Yes, please go ahead.
I think the situation is whenever you have got decisions about how much people are supposed to be prior to coming to hospital, there are projections in terms of what the expenditure for managing this particular case will be. Unfortunately, you have to understand that the person who is on site at that moment, most of them are going to be medical personnel. So I do agree that sometimes the figures that are raised are unreasonable, but it is unfortunately an individual decision by the admitting person. You might find that the escalation of that decision to the people in finance or the CFO, if it's at night, for example, is not going to be done at that right time. So people are using guesstimates. Someone will say, based on previous experience, I say this one will need 300,000. The other person's bill was 500,000. But you must remember, and let us be honest also, there are circumstances where individuals have gone to hospital and have been admitted on the basis of saying it is at night, I'm not going to be able to pay this, and after that patients are left in hospital and people disappear. That has also happened. Those kind of experiences, unfortunately, are what make it jeopardize the experience of those who come in later.
So then does it become a play-by-ear situation? Because if somebody, just taking into consideration what happens to a lot of people is that they're dealing in an emergency situation. I don't think anybody rocks up to hospital at that hour or at any time of the day in an emergency situation because they feel like it. So do you have a play-by-ear situation whereby, are these deposits being asked for because of the reasons that you've just given, because people might not pay later? Or are we looking at the emergency of the situation where somebody requires healthcare at that moment? Which one becomes what we're looking at now?
Let me make it clear, by the way, it is illegal to deny anybody emergency medical treatment for financial reasons. That is something that we cannot condone. I know it goes on in different institutions, but that is not something that should happen. That having been said, the moment somebody has been stabilized and we know what the situation is, then relatives of the patient and the people who are financially responsible have got an opt to go to an institution that they can afford. Now, in COVID situations, unfortunately, that becomes tricky. You've got somebody who, for example, is on life support. They're supposed to be transferred to another facility. That other facility that they can afford possibly doesn't have beds. Maybe the regional hospital, the county hospital doesn't have beds. Then now we're in a very difficult situation where expenses keep being incurred and they're not going to be able to be paid for. And that's why I'm saying these are circumstances where the government needs to have an emergency response fund to take care of circumstances like those. NHIF should also come in because they've got significant funds which should be apportioned to this. We have also raised funds in terms of COVID response. Those are the kind of monies that should be disbursed. We have not seen those monies being put to that use. And that's why I keep saying you can cushion other sectors of the economy, but as long as you employ and you ignore the health sector itself, we've got a health problem that is being tackled using means other than health means.
You say you've raised this issue before. Whom have you raised it with?
We have raised it in every engagement we've had meetings with NHIF. Every time we've got an engagement with the officials within the Ministry of Health, this is a concern which we have raised. We've raised in insurance companies and said, insurance companies, as much as it is that you've got a clause which says that if it's a pandemic, then this force majeure and applies, your policy is not in effect. But you have a moral responsibility. Do something. At the very least, tell us we're going to pay up to 20,000.
Yep.
That's what NHIF also should do. Say we're going to pay up to 100,000. Beyond that, let the other individuals take care of it. But they have to pay something. You cannot pay nothing.
How involved are private? I mean, I can hear what you're saying now, Doc, but how involved are private institutions in this whole conversation that we're having when we're talking about universal healthcare and we're talking about the need for a national body like NHIF to have more people on the grid in terms of what can be paid for in insurance? How involved are private hospitals and facilities involved, or practitioners involved in this conversation to try and push things to come to a head a lot quicker and a lot more complete than they are currently?
I'd say we're involved to the extent that to the extent that we are also engaged. You see, you have to understand that private institutions, first of all, we're not homogeneous. We have got a whole range of institutions from very small private facilities to pretty large ones. So again, you'll find that our interests are a bit diverse in that sense. You have got some hospitals that feel they have got a significant population of people who are going to be able to pay, so they don't necessarily need to engage in this discussion, but we've engaged the Ministry of Health and the other bodies to the extent that we can. However, one thing that I do know is any push towards UHC will not be achieved without involving the private sector. Same with COVID management. So as long as you've got 40%, 50% of the organizations they seek healthcare from not being involved in this discussion, we are likely to succeed.
Have you engaged with parliamentarians on this? Like the National Assembly Committee on Health?
Yes, we have engaged the parliamentary committee. We have given our submissions, and memorandums are personally given oral submission, especially when it came to the NHIF amendment bill that is before Parliament. And I trust that even with the current bill that is seeking to control charges of hospitals, we will also give our very strong submissions on that.
Well, that ship has sailed because the committee has already reported back to House and said, we approve and we recommend that the House passes this bill. The National Assembly Committee on Health has approved the proposed amendments to the Health Act 2017 that will see medical charges determined and capped by an 11-member council that includes the PS for Health and the Attorney General. This council is going to be called the Kenya Health Human Resource Advisory Council that should be determining the prices for medical services and doctors' consultation fees. So when they finished this, they went back to Parliament and said, well, we now want the whole House to approve and say yes to this. So the part of public participation and engagement with associations such as yourselves has already passed.
I do agree these things have happened in the past. And that's why sometimes you see we're also reluctant necessarily, because I think it becomes this thing called public participation becomes an exercise in futility. You go there, give your oral submissions. When the final drafts come out, it's got nothing to do with your input.
So
but let me tell you in terms of a
they had
practical...
already predetermined the path they want to follow before you got there.
Of course. But you see, let me tell you, it can be a populist move. And at the moment, it's good to say, oh, private hospitals are always a bashing ground, and doctors to say we're charging patients too much. But you must remember this thing about regulation. We even have at the moment, the Medical Council has got a list of charges. And they regulate even doctors' charges already, by the way. But guess what? A lot of those charges that are put in those guidelines, believe me, are so high that most of the time we actually charge less. Because I'll tell you, they're based on the top 5 hospitals charges in this country. So you find even in the periphery, people even laugh. If you ask somebody even half that rate, they'll be like, I can't afford it.
Right.
So let me tell you, in terms of enforcement, this is not what people should be doing. If you're talking about cost of healthcare, let's have that broader discussion and ask, why do we have the cost of healthcare being high in this country? Private hospitals, you must remember, do not determine the cost of healthcare inputs. Healthcare inputs, the cost of doctors' charges is just one thing. How about of drugs? Do we make drugs?
No, you
They're made by
don't.
specific manufacturers, and they provide them to us.
Terry, to be fair, surely, when it comes to private hospitals, it's a business. And
Yes.
what you do determine is what the cost of your overheads are. That is something, yes. And understanding how a business functions and operates, you're not being judged on the good work you do. It's never the case. All you require is not 10 hospitals, just one hospital. No matter how small, and it's in the media and something has gone wrong with it, then everybody is tied with that same brush. That is exactly the reality. So the other reality is this sort of discussion that we're having here, you people must find room to have more of those discussions, because so that your side is also heard, because the side that is heard the most is when something goes wrong.
When something goes wrong, or exactly, or when somebody comes out talking about inflated prices, for example, when they go to seek medical care, and that then image is put on, private hospitals, unfortunately, this particular sector.
There's need for thought leadership, Dr. Terry. Yes, go ahead.
When we say inflated, that's a term, people have got 2 terms that I have a serious issue with.
Yes.
Inflated and overcharging. First of all, that assumes that you come from a point of knowledge where, first of all, you know what the cost of that item should be, and therefore you're saying overcharged based on a guideline or some point of knowledge. Unfortunately, most of the time, healthcare, you have to admit, is a pretty complicated exercise. It's a product where most of the time, actually, even I keep maintaining that the public do not have the ability to be able to assess quality of healthcare.
And why don't we
Because
have that
they are
knowledge,
not-
Dr. Terry?
And all the time, people will assess outcomes and are what I call indicators of quality. But when it comes to medical details of what is supposed to be provided and whether it's quality healthcare or not, and I'll give you an example. You can come to me with a urinary tract infection. There's a drug which I can give you which can cure you, possibly that will cost 100 bob, and another one that can cost 5,000. With both of them, you're going to get cured. All right? When you talk about quality, I should actually provide quality with the least resources utilized. So I should give you the one that costs 100. Some people, I'll give them the drug that costs 100. They go to the pharmacy and they're told 100 bob. They'll be like, no. This drug is
So you're
not
giving
good.
them a placebo.
It's like, can I really get well with this drug?
Yes. So both of you are going to get well, so it's outcomes. And then secondly, indicators of quality. You'll come to a hospital and see how I'm dressed, how I look. Everybody has got their mental of how an institution, healthcare institution should look. Is it clean? How am I received? And so on. That's not quality of healthcare per se. That's quality of service. So that's why I'm saying a lot of these things, when somebody says I've been overcharged, you have got antibiotics that cost 20, 30,000 shillings a dose, and there's some that cost 500. So somebody says I've been overcharged because they were put on the expensive one, yes, but they needed it to be able to survive. So a lot of the time I will keep saying this issue of overcharging, and yes, again, we must remember, healthcare is a product like any other. People make choices. When you choose to live here and go to the top hospital, so-called top 5 hospitals in this country, you cannot go there and then again say that you want to be charged the fee that is elsewhere. And I give the example of a supermarket. Supermarkets, a lot of the time, you've got a whole range of products on the shelf there. So when you want to buy sugar or salt, you look at the prices and you decide which one you want to buy. It has to be the same with healthcare. So you cannot also have a homogeneous fee structure as if this is a homogeneous product.
What you've just explained now, I mean, and I know, is this explained to people? Is this explained? Is this communicated? If I go, short of me asking my medical care provider at that point, my doctor saying, Doc, could you explain this to me? You're saying that I should take this particular medication and explain to me why this over the other. Is this communication given to people when they come at the point of care? Or is it just, look, your doctor is your priest and you're everything else, take what I'm offering to you? Is this communication given? Because I think that's one way then of breaking this thing that obviously is causing a problem, to be able to be open and honest about exactly what it is. And not necessarily because you want to hide anything, but, at that point you're prescribing and we assume that you as a doctor know what it is that you're doing. Is it possible to communicate these things to patients so that you don't get now these blanket statements which you're clearly uncomfortable with, like overcharging and, the like?
Yes, I understand. And let me tell you, after practicing for over 20 years, I've seen the trend change over time. In the earlier years, by the way, the doctors knew everything, and patients didn't even want to ask. In fact, some doctors would even get offended when you start questioning them about their choices and why you put me on this as opposed to this. I think that has kind of changed. Our population is much more informed, sometimes, unfortunately, also misinformed because of getting information from all manner of sources. But in general, I think there's more engagement between doctors. So it's an issue of, first of all, telling somebody, these are the things that I need to do to be able to make your diagnosis. This is the treatment I would recommend, and these are the various options. And the patient should be able to ask you, so what am I looking at? If I take this cheap option, what am I looking at? What risk do I run? It's the same thing I say when, for example, before you put on someone on chemotherapy, a patient should ask you, what if I don't want it? What am I looking at? How am I going? So those are kind of discussions we need to have. Patients need to engage more. Doctors need to be more open and also engage more. But as people make choices, a lot of the time, let me tell you, as you walk into a facility, for example, they have posted there what the consultation fees are going to be. You cannot go in, walking in there, and once you've been treated, then you start saying, I've been overcharged. Because there's another facility charging half the price, and the public hospital possibly is free. But you can't make a choice and say you want to get a more high-end, or what you perceive as a more high-end, and get a more expensive product, but want to be charged the county hospital price.
So just in conclusion, Dr. do you, as an association, agree with this recommendation by the Health Committee of the National Assembly to have this council determining and putting a cap on the fees that hospitals charge and the fees that doctors charge?
Price control should not be put in the private in the health sector, just like in most other sectors they shouldn't. I said the approach that you should adopt, if you feel you want to have, especially protect the vulnerable population who might not be able to afford, provide good health services in the public facilities. Those who opt to go to the private sector, let it be our market forces determine what price they're going to pay. Because if you do this, you'll disincentivize in the investment in the health sector, and even healthcare professionals will say, what is the point of going to this thing if I'm not going to be able to earn a living? I'll tell you a funny thing yesterday. I was traveling in Uber yesterday, and I saw a sign inside there saying, hii kazi ni ngumu, tafadhali lipa bila fujo. I really laughed. Because that's right true for me, because you've got, first of all, getting to become a healthcare practitioner, a doctor, takes a lot of work, a lot of years.
Sure.
We work so long hours. You can't get to a point where somebody's going to say, now I'll control how much you can earn. Then somebody will say, why don't I become a trader instead, where there's no limit as to how much money you can make. And that will disincentivize
Why don't you adopt that particular mantra as something for your association? Hii kazi ni ngumu. Tafadhali
lipa bila fujo. Dr. Timothy Olweny, thank you very much for speaking to us. Doc is the Secretary General of the Kenya Association of Private Hospitals. Asante sana. Hope to have you in the studio soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you, Daktari.
Keep it right here. Kenya's biggest conversation continues. Hata hii kazi yetu, by the way, ni ngumu. Na hatukulipishi. Sikiza tu. Sikiza tu ni bure. Bila malipo yoyote.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.